So as we go through this book of James, I want us to be able to take away some very important points. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that we have is being able to take what we say we believe, and when we listen to God's word, and we go, yeah, that's beautiful, or that's so logical, and that is so wise, and things like this. But then it seems to just fail to function. You know, in the military, when I was an operations officer, we would come up with these miraculous little war plans. Every little ass, with the Russians, during the Cold War, I was one of those guys, and we're like, yeah, those Russians, they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And so we had all these plans for all these things that would happen. And then one of the fundamental rules that we always did in our planning was, rule number 1, every plan goes to chaos the first moment of contact with the enemy. In other words, you can have the best plan. You think you got it covered. But when it comes to actual action, it'll come apart. It won't happen the way you think it's going to happen. And so from there, you have to adjust. So that's kind of common sense to us as well when it comes to life, doesn't it? I mean, when it comes to worrying, I love, Joe Griffin used to say this a lot, and I steal it from him. And he says, I know that worrying works, because everything that I worry about never happens the way I thought it was going to happen. Now let that soak in. We worry about things, and we just know the terror of how it's going to unfold. And then when it happens, it wasn't close to what you thought. Now, it may have been more terrifying and worse, or nothing at all. But I bet you it wasn't the way you imagined it as you were worrying and consumed about it. So how do we take our faith and take it from something that is theory and logic and bring it together? Now, this morning, I'm kind of deviating a little bit, but we were studying the book of Mark, and we talked about Jesus in the boat, and that how in the middle of this horrific storm, that Jesus is sleeping in the back, he's over there sleeping. Now, these are sailors. These are men who knew what the storms were like. It wasn't like they were like me. You put me in a boat, give it a little bit of a roughness, and I panic. These men knew. And what we kind of come up with, and I think I wanted to share it with you, is that, it's kind of that idea that they had watched the Lord do all those things. No doubt, logical. They knew he could do those things. But there's this startle reflex that hits us. That all of a sudden, while we're living our lives, all of a sudden, we got this logical side, like Mr. Spock on Star Trek. But then that Captain Kirk comes out in us, and what happens? It's kind of like, and I've said this, and I'm going to say it again, she's going to get on to me about it, but Suzanne has an incredible startle reflex, and I've had a lot of fun with it over the years. I mean, she goes to the refrigerator, and she's got the door open, looking in, and I can just walk up and stand there. And she closes it and looks at me, and she knows it's me. But for a moment, right? The startle effect took over, and the logic was lost. That's us spiritually, right? All of a sudden, something happens, and that startle effect hits us, and we forget about who's sleeping on our boat. We forget about it. And so this book is so amazing because it's so practical in trying to help us to, one, he started out with helping us to understand how these trials and things that we're going through. And the key on that was pray for wisdom. Understand that there's something beneficial about it. Understand the source of sin. Where's it coming from? It's not from God. Only perfect things come from him. Where does it start? In the heart. And then he talks about what? Talk about showing preferential treatment. How we show preference over some over others, and how that's not godly, because God shows no preference. And then he talks about, guess what? The tongue. How dangerous and destructive it is, and how it's uncontrollable, and how that we can just say a few words and destroy somebody and never even have the intent, but it did, and it's done. And then he talks about wisdom. There's two types of wisdom. There's one of this world, science, philosophies, medicine, whatever it might be. And then, but fundamentally, even logic, it's, that wisdom of morals that the world comes up with. Well, to each his own. Well, it doesn't hurt anybody but me. But all of that, he says, is not from God, because you can tell the difference. You can see that a wisdom that comes from God is peaceful, loving, long-suffering, kind, gentle. It's orderly. It's calm. The one of the world creates chaos. And so then he's moving on to these ways that hopefully at the end of this book, when we finish, the next time you have a spiritual startle, to come back, and remember this, and it would be helpful. And what a great way to start the year, right? I mean, every year we come up with these resolutions. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and that fits in with this lesson in a way. And I hadn't even thought about it till just now, because that's kind of what we're going to talk about, is the way that we perceive what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I kind of already hit the recap. But if this section here is chapter 4:13 through 5:6. Now, he mixes a couple of things that even for the longest time, I didn't know how they tied together, and we're going to bring those together, but it is logical as he flows through this. And we've heard this. We say this a lot. Well, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, I never could understand that last part for years, because we don't have creeks. We have arroyos. But I would hear that. Well, my grandpa was raised in a place where they had creeks. They called them creeks. But what did that mean? If the Lord is willing and the creek don't rise. In other words, I can't be sure absolutely that it's going to happen, because the first one was declaring what? God. God. And so this is our new year. Are you going to be here next Sunday of 2027? If the Lord is willing and the arroyo don't rise. Because you don't know. And so when we look at those and the way the logical passion of what he's trying to show is really, it's been there all along. And you know what it is? It started at the very first verses, was this very difficult word for us to put into practice. Easy to say, beautiful in theory, lovely when you hear others doing it, is humility. Isn't it? Oh, we try. I love this one, Brother Paul Earnhardt. I only got to listen to his cassettes. We had a library full of them. But that man would bring me to tears sitting in there by myself, listening to the way he preached. And he had such humility. And one year, finally, I got to go down to Houston. And he was already like 80 years old. And he was exactly the way I perceived him through these audios and stuff. And he was just so amazingly easygoing. And he got up there, and they'd done this amazing introduction for him. But all the things he's done and his beautiful work and all this, and he got up there and he said, man, that just took all my humility away. When you start talking about it, what? But it's more of a problem, because there's a lot of it where we say, well, it's self-worth. And if you don't have some self-worth, then you're chaotic. You have no confidence, and then you can't accomplish anything. So God understands that. But you cannot do it by yourself. That's the key of what this next section is going to talk about. And so let's jump into 13 and 14. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. It's not the problem with planning. Because without planning, then you do nothing, right? Everything. When you got up this morning, you made a plan for what clothes you were going to wear. You made plans. You probably already in such a habit that you already knew, do I take the shower the night before? Do I get up? Do I lay my clothes out? Do I need to iron this? You're already planning. Life is inevitably about organization, and planning. It's not about the planning. It's the planning without God. Now, that sounds simple, right? Well, everything I do, I plan with God. Do you really, though? Do you really? I mean, we got to go deeper than just saying, well, of course, Ron. Is it that much a part of your life that God is in it all? Because that's where it has to start. It has to start at such a core level of us that everything we're doing is with the understanding, the humility. Humility means you're exposing yourself. One aspect of it, to me, is that when I show people my vulnerable side, I'm exposing something to me, and I want them to understand that I'm not better, I'm not smarter, I'm not stronger, but I have something that you have as well in a weakness. I have kryptonite that gets me. And that's hard. We want to hide that, don't we? We just seem to want to protect ourselves because the world is nasty out there. And we know what they do with it when they find out about that. We see Facebook. We see the bullies online and social media. And so we try to think, I'm like Superman. Shoot all the social media bullets at me you want. It doesn't bother me. So we think I can handle it. And that is a core level that can turn to rot. Because if we don't have God there, then we're the problem. There's two realities that I want to share with you when we look at this. One, he's saying, you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. As much planning as you have, you and I have all already experienced it, haven't we? We thought and we planned and we were going to go over and go camping or go shopping or work on a project, fix a car, bake a cake, cook a roast, whatever it might be, crochet a necklace or whatever. And then one phone call, one text message, change in weather, something happens. And so we don't know what's tomorrow. Now that makes you vulnerable though, doesn't it? It kind of is unnerving. Then you could be like a lot. You say, well, I don't have to do anything then since I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I just won't do anything. Or you'll just do whatever you want moment by moment by moment. And then it's all about you again. It's not trying to humiliate us or to cause us concern. What he's trying to do is get you to understand, like I was reading from Psalms 19:1 this morning, that everything is God. Everything. There's not a molecule in your body, the toenails you clipped off, everything is God's. Now, everything that you own, it's not the same at all, but everything that you own is important to you. That's why it's still stacked in that closet. You won't throw it away. It means something to you. And if somebody else was to come along and ask you for it, you'd probably say, no, well, it's got 10 inches of dust on it, but no, you can't have it because, I have a purpose for it. It's mine. It's important to me. And God is that way with you. And we need to understand we're in God's world. And there's nothing that is unimportant to him. And so that is the part I think James is trying to get us to understand. In order to go forward, in other words, if we're going to take this faith of ours that we read in the Gospels and the Sermon on the Mount and all these wonderful things, you have to get the humility in first. You have to understand that there's a core level of nothingness about you, and it's all about God. And that's where he can start building, you see. It's almost like a house. You look at it, I've seen some really cool houses, and I think, wow, if you could just straighten that wall up, or you could, put this on it, or cover it up, or paint it. And sometimes, the contractor goes, no, we need to strip it down. The only thing good is just the foundation. You know what? That's what God has to do to us, is to strip out all those things so he can start to build on that. And that's what James is trying to show to us. We go about our business like little ants, trying to do these things, and we don't realize that God is at the core and the essence of everything in this dimension. And so to think that somehow I have any control, I don't. And so the next reality is the brevity of life. Solomon really hammers that point home, doesn't he? I mean, it's very similar to what he's saying. Here, James is saying life is a vapor. Now, again, as adults, you've seen people's lives and how they've come and gone, and how many people in your life that you've seen, that you've loved, or that you've known. Where are they? A lot of them are in the grave. They're not here anymore. And it was such a short life. And now that I'm at my age, I think 70 is young. When I was 30, it was ancient. But I'm there now. I talk like my grandpa. I caught myself talking like my grandpa and my dad. I'm like, oh man, I sound like I am. I am him now. It's just, we don't know. We don't know for certain anything. And so what does that mean? In a lot of ways, if you think about it, you keep it into perspective, it helps to frame where you're really living. And it also frames out the garbage. See, a lot of people are building their house, like what Jesus said, on sand. And it's going to crumble. That's the wisdom of the world. But when I can frame it and I can bring it in and start it with this understanding of humility. So he goes on and says, instead of that, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. You notice the starting statement of any planning or any thought is kind of like, is God involved? How many times have we said that? I'm going to go to Walmart. Is God involved? I'm going to go hunting. Is God involved? That doesn't make sense. I understand. You probably don't. I don't. But is God in everything? In every consideration? And it kind of goes back to that startle reflex, where, sometimes the startle reflex will have lasting effects, right? Your heart's still beating, you're still scared, how long does it last? I mean, because God knows we're going to have some startle and stuff, but where do we anchor back at? What are we targeting? And so when we look at this, if the Lord is in everything, if he's the first thing that we're kind of putting in and making sure we're including, it doesn't have to be the very first words out of your mouth, but it needs to frame yourself, frame your thinking around the idea that everything that I am doing is one, it's God's. My actions, they're God's, because this is his world. This body is his. So everything that I do have repercussions and consequences, and they have like that ripple effect. You cannot walk through the lake of life without ripples touching around everyone around you. And everyone is God's children. And so that's why starting at this level is so important. So putting him there as we're living our lives, putting it first. And a very apparent one that hit me years ago was this idea of, especially like we have the university here, and we have a lot of people coming, government workers who have come and gone and moved through here, is that a lot of them will, come to me later and they'll say, hey, I'm moving to this Timbuktu, whatever state. Well, congratulations. Yeah, I got a job there. Do you know of a good church there? Now, that sounds innocent, okay? Now, I'm not saying don't ask me if there's churches or where they're at, okay? That's not my point. What did they think of first when they took the job? A church or a job? And then I've served, and a lot of times it's like the nearest church is like 2 hours away. Do you think they didn't take the job? No, they took the job. Do you think it had spiritual impact on their lives? Absolutely. Some say, well, I'll just worship in my house. No, that's okay. There's nothing unscriptural about that necessarily, but we know very clearly that the beauty and the power comes from a community of other Christians, and that's the way God organized it. That's one of the devastating things of what happened with COVID. It broke that apart, made you think that you're okay, that you can just sit and watch videos and you're good with God. No, you're not. You may be thinking that, but you're not, because God put us as a family, put us in a community, not a virtual reality. And so these choices that we make, that one came very apparent, was a lot of, people, young and old, randomly picking a place to go live and not even considering if there is a way they can worship God right before they move. Now, that hits home. It does, doesn't it? But I think that is a good illustration of that. Can I serve the Lord there? Are there Christians there? No, but I'm going to make some good money. It's a beautiful country. Blah, blah, blah. We can go on and on, right? So what does he say, when he says about the posture? That's why I say there's a Christian position. When you talk about posture, standing, how you stand, sit, slope, there's a certain posture as well spiritually. Is the idea of this, if the Lord wills, is helping us to understand, be in submission. If it is his will, then that's what's going to happen. If it's not, then that's what's going to happen. In other words, it's not, I'm going to be disappointed. That's what's going to happen. Too often we take it as, okay, I'll take my lumps. If it's not his will, okay, I'll take his lump. No. It's beautiful. You can try to make it sound better, more palatable, and say, well, that's just what God wants. It was the best thing he wanted for you. Do you see it that way? We plan, but we should hold those outcomes loosely, not rely upon them, and make sure that we're thinking of God and wanting to make sure it's in alignment with what he would want. Most of the time, you'll be more successful with making those alignments, with achieving what you want. God is going to achieve what he wants, okay? That's a given. He's going to. He wins, by the way. He wins. So you need to figure out what is his will. Well, what would he really want to desire about it? So he's going to govern it, our life. He's going to govern these opportunities, and he's going to see the results that he wants for you. He goes on in 16. He says, as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Let's go back to that idea I was talking about, where people have just chose a location to go live because of some other reason than the fact that there was a really good spiritual place that they could worship God correctly. They know they need to worship. They know they need to glorify God in a community of Christians, but that was not what they did. This is what he's saying. You know that, but you still chose to go to a place that's going to impact your family and your spiritual strength. And that's just one, because I've been working that illustration that is a real one, but this is multitude of things that we're doing. And that's why he ties us in. It sounds interesting. It's like, wow, you know the right thing to do and you fell, it's sin. In other words, you know what God really wants you to be doing. It's like I talk about, that in our nature, we know what good morals are. We know the right thing. You don't just murder somebody, but you do it, guess what? It's sin. If we know the Bible, and that's almost the hypocrisy we'll be talking about. How do you take what you say you believe and make it action? You know not to worry. Why? Because Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough of its own, right? We hear that. We love, it doesn't warm your heart, And then we worry. What is James inferring here? Well, we're sinning. We know not to do something because of the ramifications, and somehow we think we can overcome it, that we're better than that. That's okay. I can still be very spiritual and a good, faithful Christian, and not a Christian be around me for 500 miles. And maybe you're the unique one that can. But the laws of probability are completely against you. But you do it anyway. And so that, I think, is what he's saying. So boasting in that self-control. See, because we don't like the idea of losing control. We never like the idea of giving control to somebody else. Right? We just have that in us. And it's like, no, you got to just give him the control. Because self-control is a part of that word I say is sin, is selfish. And just understand. It's like he said about the tongue, James earlier, about how that you can't control it. But with the Lord, you can. It's dangerous, and so the same thing does. So we need to learn how to choose humility and dependence. And again, that's another thing that's against us. We don't want to be dependent on anybody. So many people are so independent. They won't ask for help. They won't say they're hurting, right? I got this. I can do this. I can handle it. And they don't. And one of the most beautiful times is when a person finally says, can you please help me? I can't do this. And that's what we have to do with God. Lord, please help me. I can't do this. I'm not sure how to do this. Remember, the very first part of the book said, pray for wisdom. Pray for that wisdom to understand that. So jumping to 5, this may seem like a disconnect, but it's not. We'll talk about it. Let's read 1 through 3. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. How does that connect to this? I mean, we went from this idea, humility and not knowing what you're planning and stuff, and then all of a sudden, money, picking on those rich people. He's talking about materialism. What do you get from materialism? You got it. See? It goes back to that idea that what I willed, I got. And it's mine. And it also is counterintuitive to what I just said about everything is his to begin with. When people ask me, well, how much should I give in contribution? Is there a tithing? Is there a percentage or whatever? And I said, it's really hard because the Lord says what you feel you have prospered, then that's what you give. Whoa, give me a number, please. Because then I can look at my bank statement and say, yep, check, got it. I did it. But when it's what you have prospered. So I want, if you stop for a millisecond here and think, so what were you prosperous about this last week? Boy, coming out of the holidays, you're going, nothing, man. It was all spending. Stressful. But we prosper. And so when we try to think we need something, because tomorrow, when you're driven around the idea of the way the world believes you need in order to retire in America, Social Security sends you, and if it hasn't, they're going to start. They'll send you a little thing in the mail that says, based on what you've contributed and the number of years and how many quarters, that if you retire at this age, this is what you'll get, and you retire at this age, you get this, and then you can apply for that. Whoo, man, I'm glad I got that. And how many people have died before they got a dime? Or their 401ks, or whatever investments they may have. Again, the Lord isn't saying it's wrong to have security for retirement and be understanding. But is that what you're relying on? Because if you think about it, retirement is a very novel concept that's only within the 19th century. 19, okay, so that means 18 before that, and all the centuries before that, those centuries, nobody got to retire. Do you think their employers kept money so that they could give it to them? Do you think the Roman Empire said, good job, Ron, Now, there was some. But even like a Roman soldier, he had to serve 20 years. You know what their lifespan was? Yeah, it was short. How many of them got to enjoy it? But you know what? That motivated them. Yeah, I'm going to get some land. And all of a sudden, they're dead. Got nothing. So what did you depend on? You had this false sense of thinking, I've got this security in this funding, and I've got this security because of this, and God's not a part of that. And I know a lot of people are facing retirements where they're very nervous about it. I don't know how many, and it's even in Christian conversations about Social Security isn't going to be here when I get there. Oh my, I don't know what I'm going to do. Where's the Lord in that? When the Lord promised the people in Jerusalem, when the Assyrian army was surrounding them, and they were starving to death, and they had nothing to hope for except a quick death, the Lord told Isaiah to tell him, I'm going to take care of you. That would be hard to say, Whew, thank you. I feel so much better. But see, that's the message within the prophets where God says there are some that do get it. They do understand that. So whether they have something prepared, whether they have these resources in the world, it doesn't matter to them because you know what? They're God's. And God has always taken care of his people, regardless of how much or how little. So we come back to this illustration. He's talking about these people. Look what he says. He goes, you weep and how the miseries are upon you. You look at people with a lot of wealth and a lot of toys and a lot of things, their house burns down compared to my house. If my house burns down, I don't have as many toys as some of my other friends that have like ATVs and fifth wheels and all this stuff. Their house burns down. It hurts a lot more. But if my burns, it hurts as much to me, but I don't own the fifth wheel. But the things that I have, and it's where we think somehow that has achieved a level of success, of security. When fundamentally, without God, as Solomon says, it's vanity of vanities. All things are vain. A life without God in all of this is kind of a summation of what the Ecclesiastes writer was talking about. That a life without God is always going to leave you longing. It's going to be exactly the way he says here. You're going to be reaping. Your riches are going to rot. How many people have had billions of dollars, millions of dollars in stocks and different things? We see it historically. We've had a couple of crashes historically of the stock market where people went from millionaires to zeroaires. Nothing. And that's what he's kind of describing here. So if that is the potential and you know that that's a fact that can happen, where's God? Where's God in this? And why do you have so much that stuff can rot? Right? I mean, you almost go back to looking at how we favored people that James was talking about, how that when we see somebody who has this wealth and garments and silver and gold, we look at them and he said, what do? We think they're better, and we treat them with a little bit of specialty over somebody who looks like they don't got nothing. Why? Because the world says that person who looks like they have nothing probably doesn't. Therefore, they're not as successful or intelligent. And the one who has a bunch, he must be successful and he must be intelligent because he has a bunch of stuff. And that's the fool's philosophy. And so that's why he shows that. You laid up treasure in the last days, right? So it's a prophetic warning as well. Like what Solomon in the Ecclesiastes, the same thing. It was kind of a prophetic warning at the end of it all. There's one final thing that's going to happen to all of us. Well, two. One, we're going to die. And then we're going to be judged. And it's not going to matter how much gold or whatever you had, And didn't Jesus in that same wording talk about laying up things on the earth that can be eaten by moths and destroy and rot? And what did he tell us? He said, lay up your what? Your treasures where? In heaven. And God will bless you. And so, hoarding in the last days, thinking, well, I'm getting out of retirement age. I better hold on to it. And then when you die, the people who get all those toys or the money and the inheritance and stuff, blow it. And you had no control over it unless you did a really good will. But even then, why'd you hold on to it? So I could give something to my kids. They didn't earn anything. You did. Did you need it? Is that really necessary? And so what does that mean? If you have that much, what else then you could be doing, right? Sharing. Not socialism, not communism. Helpingism. Helping. Lifting the burden of those around you because you have so much it's starting to rot. Now, we do that with food a lot of times, where we have a lot of food, and so we know somebody needs it. We don't have a problem with that. Yeah, I'll share. We're sharing. What about with the other resources? Not just money. I hate to do that because we just always narrow in on money, but there's a lot of stuff we have that maybe, that's got 10 inches of dust in the closet I was talking about. Give it up. Somebody might need it. It's just going to rot. And so that's the hoarding in the last days is what he's kind of bringing out. In verse 4, behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying against you. And the cries of the harvesters reach the ears of the Lord of hosts. I see that in a lot of ways. A lot of times we think this is just a corrupt employer, just corrupt. But we see it a lot of ways. I mean, we go back to the early 1800s, and when we hit the industrial age in America, and when we started having factories and stuff, and the coal mines and railroads and all these things that were going on, steel mills, the employers would pay nothing. And they were like our modern day billionaires. Everybody picks on our billionaires today and talking about it, and there's some truth to it, but it was nothing compared to Dale Carnegie, Rockefellers, and they didn't care. They had no, I mean, if you look at some of the things they did, the bus strikes when people were complaining about dying and being killed in unsafe conditions. And it may not be that grotesque, is what he's talking about, but there's a lot of ways that employers have manipulated employees into getting it. And this is going to be a very maybe weird thing to say, but just look at what has happened in the corporations. We've gone from full-time employment where employers were giving full-time benefits and that they had a career with a company, and the company had loyalty to the employee, and the employee had loyalty to the company, to where now, in order to save money, corporations take all their full-time jobs to part-time. You know why? They don't have to pay full-time benefits. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, huh? I was going to name a name, but I'm not. Do you know how many billions of dollars they started making? Because guess what? They don't have to pay your benefits because you're just part-time. And then, okay, and they make it sound like you're making more money, right? Well, if you were full-time, you'd make less an hour. Yeah, but I'm spending more because I got to go find health care. I got to go find these other things that I thought you would give me. So that's why, that's kind of one to where we can see this kind of a greed in our society and not thinking about it. And I think that's kind of what he's bringing out, is this idea that we need to be careful about our attitudes of others around us. God hears the defrauded. So all those corporations I just named, God hears the cries of the defrauded. They're not going to get away with it. But that's also with you, isn't it? And us. Maybe we're not defrauding on such an obvious level, but there may be some ways, you know. The last point there on that slide is, you know what? Justice may be delayed, but it's not denied. It's going to happen. You may not see it in your lifetime, but they're going to be accountable. They will. He says, you have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fatted your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Remember, he's using covenant language because murder absolutely was a violation against the covenant. But you know what? Hate wasn't. But remember what Jesus said about where does it all start? It starts with hate, right? So when we talk about that, we look at this idea of self-indulgence while others are suffering. You're enjoying an abundance while others are suffering. And what James says is you're inviting God's judgment because he is very aware of the needs of what's going on. And you know, that's another method of God providing and giving his providential care to others is through us. He doesn't have an organization where Michael runs it on 5th and Main Street, you know, where the Archangel Michael runs this store, you know, where God is producing this stuff. You know how he gets it to people? It's through us. And that's what really exposes the truth of our heart and what we're doing. And that's why we can see this idea of power, how it can corrupt, how it can cause us to think, well, I need more. I talked about how one of these billionaires last Sunday and sitting around with his billionaire friends, and he talked about how much they were still driven. Even though they had billions of dollars, they're still driven to misery almost on how they can make another billion. They're not any happier. Power condemn the righteous, you know. The good people that you didn't think was as worthy are very worthy in God's eyes. Some of the takeaways from this section, I think, is one, plan with humility. Always try to put the Lord into that equation, into your prayers. Live generously. You know, what you have may be an abundance compared to somebody else. And what you have may be very little to someone else. It's relative, in other words. It's something we need to think about. Deal justly. Be fair. All of this is because this is the way God deals with us. He deals justly. He gives us generously, does he not? And he is also humbled. Look at Jesus. You can't get much humbler than what our Lord Jesus Christ did for us. And that's why when we think about the humility that's required, it takes a lot of humility as well to accept our condition spiritually. And that's why we need to evaluate it constantly. We need to fight against pride, logic of the world, and it'll keep us away from God. And that's where I see a lot of people who are trying to keep away, and they don't realize it, but it's through a little bit of pride and fear that they're afraid. One, they use a justification saying, well, I'm not worthy, I'm not perfect enough, I still do certain things, and so they just hold themselves back. Well, you can't do it on your own, period. And you're right, Christians are sinners. They're forgiven, though. They have that non-Christians don't. God never expected us that when we become a Christian to all of a sudden become perfect and sinless. And that's why the blood of Christ is so beautiful. You see, the blood of bulls and goats could never atone, could never forgive, but the blood of Christ does. So now, where are you in your journey in life? Are you a child of God? How are you doing with it? You know, that's a personal question. If you're not a child of God, why are you not? What is it about this world that is so much more pleasing and secure that's going to provide for you than what the everlasting loving Creator? And what else can he do to get your attention than send his son to be so brutally sacrificed? I was just thinking about that during the Lord's Supper. I thought, you know, we talk about capital punishment. And there's all these moral arguments about, well, it's just cruel and unusual punishment. The guy murdered a family, you know. Now, I'm not talking about there's some that are on death row, they shouldn't be and all that. But even God said, you know, that life for life. And so, but today we're so sterile about it that we think about, well, man, did he feel pain? And I know I'm being silly and kind of, but you know, we get into that part. And then I go to the cross. And I think about the brutality that crowds were cheering on. Did anyone think about what he was doing? And yet he was sinless. And that's humility. And that's what he has done for us. And so that's why I say, what else can he do if you're not a Christian to get you and to touch your heart enough to say, I want that love. I want that relationship. I want eternal life. But humility, you know, it's more than just accepting that he is God, that he's your Lord. It's actually then demonstrating that faith in action. And that is through baptism. And then that brings you into that relationship. So if you're here this morning in any aspect of your relationship with God, if we can help you this morning and you're comfortable and you'd like to come forward and speak with us, this is your moment. This is your moment. So think about this while we stand and sing.